So, a lot of you have been saying that you really want me to look at the early Muslim expansion. I think now is finally the time to do it. So, I've been holding this off for a bit, for several reasons. Mainly because, wait, before I get into that, I am currently using Kings and Generals playlist about the early Muslim expansion. I know you guys are very particular about me looking at the longer videos, so here's my plan. I'm gonna break it down to you. We're gonna be watching this in many parts, the early Muslim expansion, Khalid, all the way to al-Qadisiyyah. Point is, this is the first one of the playlist. So we're gonna start here, and then we're going to look and then once I wrap this one up, I'm gonna jump to this one. It's the early Muslim expansion, Arab conquest of Iran and Egypt. And then I'm gonna jump forward into into this third video, which is another long one, which is the early Muslim expansion, Europe, North Africa, Central Asia. So since I'm gonna be watching those three, since they're the longest ones, and I'm assuming encompass the series. So I'm going to be looking at them, not all at once. I'm going to be doing it all in parts. And then once I'm done with these three, I'm going to jump onward to the Ottoman conquest. Wait, let me show you guys right here. Ottoman conquest. So then after I'm done with early Muslim expansion, I'm going to jump to the rise of the Ottoman Empire, which is 6 hours. Again, that's like 4 long videos. I'm not gonna watch them all at once. I'm gonna obviously divide these into parts. Like for today, we're just gonna cover the up to the Battle of the Chains, and you know that conclusion. So yeah, that's how we're gonna be operating, and yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than this is very exciting. You know, we're definitely in the Middle East now. We're kind of a little bit away from Europe, because I feel like a lot of what we've watched has been centralized in Europe. I mean, we have gone to the Middle East-ish, you know, like at least to the border, to the side border, you know, from Egypt to, you know, Asia Minor. But like a lot of what we've watched has been, you know, set in European Christendom, you know, or Catholicism. So this is definitely gonna be different, a completely new perspective. I don't know anything. I don't know what figures are gonna emerge. I don't know who I'm gonna be rooting for. I'm completely blind at the moment. So yeah, this will definitely be an interesting series. I hope it all goes well. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than we should probably get right to it, huh? Let's watch the early Muslim expansion by Kings and Generals from Khalid to... Wait, I need to get this right. So let's see what Google Translate has. I hope Arabic's the right one.
al-Qadisiyyah.
al-Qadisiyyah.
al-Qadisiyyah? So I guess Khalid to al-Qadisiyyah. Alright, let's get to the video.
Almost 1,400 years ago, the ancient and prosperous lands of the Middle East were on the verge of a conflict of 3 empires and 3 religions, 2 of them fighting a constant, bloody and fruitless war for centuries, one a newcomer looking to make its mark. The newcomer was the Rashidun Caliphate, and its arrival would change the history of the region and the world forever. The Roman state was almost constantly at war with the Iranian empires ever since the 2 entities touched borders in the 60s BC, as the Parthian Empire achieved a famous victory at Carrhae. The Roman Republic transitioned into the empire, and then this empire's western portion was lost to foreign invasions, leaving only the Eastern Roman Empire, while the Parthian Empire was replaced by the Sassanid Empire. But even then, these 2 states continued to fight. In the 3rd century AD, another factor was introduced to these conflicts, the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids. These 2 Arab tribal confederations migrated from modern Yemen and became the vassal states of the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sassanids respectively. They participated in the Roman-Sassanid Wars, often as scouts or raiders detached from the armies, or as light cavalry units within the armies, while also defending both empires from the Arab tribal raids from the south. The populations of these kingdoms worshipped traditional Arab paganism and Monophysite Christianity, and the latter created tensions with their suzerains, as the Sassanids were sure that any Christian influence may strengthen their Roman enemies, while the Romans adhered to Miaphysite Orthodox Christianity, which considered Monophysitism to be heretical. The Roman attempts to suppress Monophysitism caused the Sassanids to rebel against them in the late 6th to early 7th century and weakened Roman support in the area. On the other hand, religious tensions between the Lakhmids and the Sassanids were compounded by the attempts of Shah Khosrow II to control the region directly. In 602, he captured and executed the Lakhmid king Al-Numan III, turning the kingdom into a province administered by a governor. That forced the Lakhmid tribes to ask their Arab brethren to the south for help. Although the allied forces managed to defeat the Sassanid army at Dikar in 609, the Sassanids were able to keep the province under their rule. This sequence of events not only created divided loyalties among the Arab tribes in the region, but effectively stripped the Sassanid border of its traditional buffer. Despite that, the Sassanids were still very strong. In 602, they used the internal strife within the Eastern Roman Empire as a pretense to declare war. The Sassanids scored a number of impressive victories in the
I like that. I'm about to end this man's whole career. Oh man. So I'm not used to seeing memes from kings and generals, so they stand out more when it happens. So yeah, this is definitely interesting. A lot of this obviously is just meant to build up, and we are aware of, like, you know, the Romans and their, you know, rivalry with Parthia, and then the Sassanids later, and then, you know, I remember when we were covering the Caliphate by, you know, epic history, you know, essentially, like, this early Muslim expansion rose up and, like, basically became like a third player through rapid expansion, you know, affecting the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sassanids. I think they even, like, straight up, like, destroyed the Sassanids, right? Or, like, put it straight on life support. It's been a while since we watched that two-parter from Epic History, but, you know, do know what's coming. And it's interesting that, you know, like, the Arabian Peninsula is something that's was never fully, like, straight up conquered. At least in maps, you see, like, it's usually, like, its own neutral thing, and I think, from what I've heard, it's mainly due to the geography. Like, a lot of it is just vast deserts, and, you know, not, like, a bunch of cities, so you see more of the cities aspects on, like, the coastal areas of this peninsula, and, you know, but not the center. The center's, like, a lot of it throughout history has been desert. That's why you never see it be conquered or absorbed. And I do believe the Romans did attempt to conquer the Arabian Peninsula, but if I remember correctly, like, they were misguided by a guide, which thwarted their attempts. So, you know. Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to speak about what I know.
The first years of the war, and although the Roman noble Heraclius took the throne in 611 and started to stabilize the situation, he wasn't able to slow down the enemy completely. By 621, the Sassanids controlled the South Caucasus, the Levant, Egypt, and most of Anatolia, which marked the largest extent of their territory. Even though Emperor Heraclius was forced to fight against the Avars in Europe too, he was able to gain some momentum by winning 2 battles against the Sassanids between 622 and 625. According to some sources, Khosrow enlisted all men capable of fighting and turned the tide again. In 626, an army under Shahrbaraz besieged the capital of the empire, Constantinople, supported by the Avars and Sclaveni from Europe. The Roman Empire was on the brink of destruction, but the defenders of the capital persevered. This was the turning point in the war, as in 627, Heraclius entered an alliance with the leader of the Western Turkic Khaganate, Tonyabku.
Yeah, I also want to mention that a lot of this, we did cover through the Dovahadi series. It's funny because like the Dovahadi Unbiased History series actually ends with this conflict of, Heraclius and Khosrow. If I remember correctly, Khosrow dies. That despite the Sassanids' great extent and success here, that, Khosrow, he dies, and then like Heraclius also rebounds. And I did really admire Heraclius a lot for, how he handled this conflict with the Sassanids. I remember that videos. I compared him favorably to Gallienus, Emperor Gallienus, of the crisis of the 3rd century, because, Gallienus was just going up against the odds. And I was like, oh yeah, Heraclius kind of reminds me of him. Someone, like, proceeded to, like, I remember a comment kind of called me out, like, no, Heraclius ain't like that. Heraclius is a failure and like really aggressive. And I was like, okay. And I guess it'll be interesting to kind of see the continuation of that, because I do know, obviously, the Sassanids, Khosrow dies, the Sassanids, there's a lot of, power struggles, and they essentially go on the decline. And then it's in this that the Muslims just show up and expand and, come in like a wrecking ball, so it'll definitely be interesting to see that. It's kind of almost like a continuation of that series, if I remember. Oh.
And together they invaded the Iranian heartland. Heraclius defeated the Sassanids at Nineveh in 627 and threatened the capital Ctesiphon in 628, which prompted the nobles to overthrow Khosrow. His son, Kavad II, became the next Shah and signed a peace treaty with Heraclius. The Sassanids paid a war indemnity, but otherwise the conflict achieved nothing, and the two exhausted empires returned to the pre-war borders. Meanwhile, to the south, the Arabian Peninsula was going through an upheaval. The population of this peninsula worshipped many religions, from the traditional Arab pagan beliefs to Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Christianity. The Sassanids controlled the province of Mazun and the eastern portion of Yemen, while the deserts in the central and northern parts of the region were ruled by nomadic Bedouin Arabs. Their brethren resided in the rich merchant city-states in Hijaz. One of these city-states, called Mecca, was both a religious and economic center governed by the Quraysh tribe, trading mostly spices with Aksum, the Romans and the Sassanids. In 570, a boy called Muhammad was born in the Quraysh tribe. As a young man, Muhammad spent his time as a merchant.
Yeah, I'm well aware of, Mecca and, Muhammad and, the founding of Islam. And even the story, like the tale, as it goes, is that, that the angel Gabriel, met with him. And, there's definitely a lot to Muhammad. I don't want to completely spitball everything, because I'll obviously forget more important details, but, essentially he's like the prophet of, Islam, and a very prevalent figure, like the prevalent figure, and, Mecca, the holy city. I've heard, people make believers in Islam, make voyages just to see the holy city. It's like very important, So yeah, I am aware of this mainly due to my own theology studies and whatnot, and it's definitely kind of cool to see that how much I'm actually familiarized so far, and I'm happy with that.
Probably participating in and then leading trade caravans all over the region. As is often the case with traders, Muhammad would meet and converse with members of various religions on his travels. According to the later sources, he started receiving divine revelations sometime in 610. Soon this new prophet began spreading the message of a new religion, Islam, in his home city of Mecca. However, the Meccans didn't receive it well.
Yeah, I also do, you're not supposed to depict the Prophet Muhammad. That's the big thing. You're not supposed to, like, depict him or have an image of him, right? So that's interesting, obviously. And Kings and Generals is being respectful of that by not depicting him, having, the symbol instead, which is a good thing because you don't want to, upset people about that. But, like, that's an interesting thing. I guess to anyone who wonders. Well, I assume most of you have already know this series and know all that. I'm just saying, if anyone does wonder or has wondered why, it's a big thing. You're not supposed to depict Muhammad.
And in 614, they started to persecute adherents of Islam. All this prompted Muhammad and his followers, the Muslims, to emigrate to Medina in 622. This started a war between the Muslims and Mecca, and by 629 the latter lost and was conquered. According to the early Muslim sources, at this point, sometime in 628, Muhammad sent envoys to the neighbouring states, urging their leaders to join Islam and bow to the one God, Allah. The Sassanid Shah Khosrow II insulted the Muslim envoy, while the one sent to the Romans was killed in Ghassanid territory. This prompted an attack by a small Muslim army, which was defeated by the Ghassanids and Romans in September of 629 at Mu'tah. The same sources claim that Muhammad decided to lead a 30,000-strong army into the Byzantines' territory to retaliate, and took the city of Tabuk. However, most modern sources do not agree with this account of events.
Again, like, as we know, the Muslims are about to make a huge jump into the world stage right now. So it's funny, like, seeing, this young group, talking with these established nations like Rome and the Sassanids, and, like, straight up, like, hey, convert, you know what I mean? And obviously I don't think at the moment they took it that seriously, right? Because, like, who are these guys, But boy would they know, boy would the entire world know who the Muslims are and Islam and how quickly it spread. It's really one of those things that spreads so quick because, you've heard of nations rise, but it's like, it's interesting because, like, I mean, obviously all nations have beliefs, but, you could, like, kind of separate the two, right? Like, with the rise of Rome, you don't associate it so much with, obviously they had pagan practices, but, it was just the rise of a kingdom, and there's been many of that, but, like, with the rise of, like, the Muslims, you can't separate Islam, the faith, from that. Like, there's a religious fervor that's completely a part of it. You know what I mean? So it's like the rise of the Muslims, but also the rise of Islam. Like, you could just say both, and that's just an interesting way to get started in the world stage. Just telling already established big nation/empires, convert. Like, it's really, like, I think I really loved hearing that. That was just an interesting story because I think it completely, like, captures exactly what, the rise of the Muslims and Islam, like, their attitude, I think that perfectly captured it. And that these guys didn't realize, oh, what a huge, like, new threat is about to rise. A third player's about to join the battle, and yeah.
In any case, the conquests of Muhammad in Arabia continued. By 631, most of the Arabian Peninsula was under Muslim control.
Again, the rise is insane. That all happened in his lifetime, Muhammad's. And, Muhammad, obviously, I've heard about, his military exploits. And, yeah, it's definitely interesting. He doesn't go too in-depth with it, but, he definitely wasn't passive, as a man. Like, as we saw, he led armies and fought. And again, just look, all that quickly under him. Like, Islam's rise, as we've seen in various videos, it was an explosion. It wasn't like a completely small and gradual thing. Obviously, it took years, but like what I mean is, you know, they also just kind of exploded onto the scene, as you can kind of see. And yeah, it's just a really interesting event, you know?
Muhammad passed away a year later. There are conflicting sources regarding the succession process, but one of the closest allies of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, became his successor with the title of Caliph. He was the first of the Rashidun Caliphs. In the meantime, Kavad II, who became the Sassanid Shah in February of 628, immediately started killing his brothers to secure the throne, which resulted in deepening disagreements between the Persian and Parthian nobles. Kavad died of plague in September, and although his 8-year-old son became the next Shah as Ardashir III, the empire was controlled by a member of the Parthian clique, the Vizier Ma'adad-Jushnas. This deeply concerned the Persian party, so it allied with Khosrow's general Shabaraz. The latter attacked and took the capital in April of 630, killing Ardashir and Ma'adad-Jushnas and becoming the Shah. The Sassanid realm was now in a state of civil war. Using all that, the governors of Yemen and Mazun declared their independence from Ctesiphon, which made them easy prey for the rising Caliphate. Just 40 days after Shabaraz took the throne, he was killed, and the leader of the Parthian faction, Farrukh Hormizd, raised Khosrow's daughter Boran to the throne. This first queen in Sassanid history was overthrown by the son of Shabaraz, Shapur, a few months later. To stop the war between the factions, Farrukh offered a marriage between Shapur and another daughter of Khosrow, Azarmidokht, but the latter refused, and the noble usurped the throne for himself in late 630. He would be killed by the supporters of Azarmidokht in 631, after which she took the throne for herself. Farrukh's son Rostam marched his troops.
It's just a dance, and you see this a lot in history, like, you know, with the Macedonians and the Greeks and even the Romans, and just everywhere in history with empires and kingdoms. There's always power struggles, a lot of murder, you know, killing your opponents, and it's just like a really cutthroat world, you know? And it's funny to see, like, just this constant dance as all these people, like, in declining empires will often just keep fighting. It's definitely a part of empires declining that I've noticed, you know, like when it's on the decline, obviously, you know, there's usually always power struggles. That's like kind of an underrated aspect of a falling empire. Constantly, you know, people killing each other, fighting for trying to get the throne, you know, it essentially all becomes Game of Thrones, you know. So yeah, it's just kind of like, it's just wild. Meanwhile, ignoring the more external threats that are on the rise as one declines. So yeah, I guess like declining empires become more what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they don't look at the outside so much, they look more internally, you know, while external factors just kind of start creeping and looming in, and then go on to add to the problem or completely be the final nail in the coffin, you know?
Troops to Ctesiphon to avenge his father, defeating Azarmidokht's armies along the way. After taking the capital, he restored Boran as the queen. The ruling alliance of Boran and Rostam managed to convince the leader of the Persian clique, Piruz, to stop the hostilities. However, after Rostam left the capital for the frontier, Firuzan killed Boran in June of 632. Rostam then marched for the capital again. According to some sources, the armies of both Firuzan and Rostam were tired of the bloodshed and forced their generals to reach an accord. one of the last members of the House of Sassan, the 8-year-old grandson of Khosrow II, was crowned as Yazdegerd III. Although the civil war was now over, the Sassanid realm was extremely vulnerable, as the Parthian clique basically controlled the northeastern portion of the empire, while Turkic raiders attacked from the Caucasus and Central Asia. At the same time, the first Caliph Abu Bakr sent a portion of his army under Usama ibn Zayd to raid the Ghassanids in June of 632, possibly checking if the Byzantine frontier was well defended. The death of Muhammad and the departure of his army made a big number of newly conquered Arab territories think that the Caliphate was fragile, and in July, all of the peninsula save for Hijaz rebelled against Abu Bakr in what was called the Ridda War, or the War of Apostasy, as many rebel groups were led by people who declared themselves prophets. The situation was most dire around Medina, as the rebels threatened the second most important city of the new realm in late July. However, Abu Bakr swiftly marched to the area and defeated the rebels in early August. That gave enough time for the army, which was sent north and defeated a small Ghassanid army around Mu'tah, to return. Abu Bakr proved to be a talented commander. Instead of uniting his armies and marching on each of the rebel groups separately, which would have allowed the rebels to attack his rear with impunity.
Yeah, it's kind of like a course system. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting. I'm not sure it specifically is, but like, you know, separating your force and then spreading out and dealing with... Yeah, it's kind of like kind of similar to the course system, you know? That's pretty interesting. Yeah, good move. You know, I guess like marching individually would give the enemy group, yeah, like he said, I guess time to, you know, consolidate, but taking them all on separately and whatnot, not such a bad idea actually. Like, impressed.
He divided his army into smaller groups, and these units attacked the enemies around the peninsula. This strategy worked to perfection, and by March of 633, the Caliph's rule over the entire region was restored. It is difficult to assess how much the Caliphate lost in terms of manpower, but the sources underline that the generals and troops gained invaluable experience in this conflict. While the Ridda Wars were going on, the leader of the Arab Bani Bakr tribe, Muthanna bin Haritha, was raiding the Sassanid territories in southern Iraq. The Sassanid civil wars made this frontier subject to attacks, and Muthanna, who adopted Islam sometime in the 630s, informed Abu Bakr of this fact in early 633. The Caliph decided that it was a good time to take over Iraq, and one of his main generals during the Ridda Wars, Khalid ibn al-Walid, was ordered to invade the region. Khalid was able to recruit an army of 18,000 at his base at Yamamah and left for Iraq in late March 633. A letter was sent to the Sassanid governor of Dast Maisan, Hormozd, demanding his surrender. Hormozd obviously didn't, but sent a letter to the capital, asking Shah Yazdegerd III for reinforcements. This letter was probably a trick by Khalid, as Hormozd gathered his 20,000 and marched out of the capital of his governorship, Uballa, to defend the crucial road from Yamamah near Kazima. Khalid, however, moved his troops through the desert and threatened Hufir. The Sassanid leader was informed of this and had to march towards Hufir via Uballa. According to the Muslim sources, that was exactly what Khalid was hoping would happen. Despite the civil wars, Sassanid armies were still stronger, as their armor and weaponry made them superior, and the only tangible advantage the Caliph's forces had was their mobility. Khalid was going to use this mobility to tire the Sassanid army. This would become one of the most important elements of the early Muslim expansion. Their mobility and aggression were forcing their foe to defend multiple cities and fortresses, as it was never clear where the Arabs would strike.
Yeah, but mobility and speed is just like a great advantage to have in war. You know, how much I could name, like, we've watched so many freaking war videos on this channel, but you know, an army that can outmaneuver its enemies and, you know, be faster. Big advantage, and you know, if used correctly, can usually win other forces. Like speed and mobility are two aspects that like are more than advantageous, you know what I mean? And so yeah, like using this this is just smart on the Muslims' part. You know, we're not as well equipped as our enemies, but that's fine because our enemies can't freaking touch us, and you know, we're gonna overextend them as we're moving and blitzing around. They're, you know, just trying to like get us. Like, I think that's just a smart approach, and like again, like just how quickly the Muslims not only have risen, but like are adapting, you know, to war and dealing with an already established empire like the Sassanids. And granted, the Sassanids have already been through a bit much. They're definitely not at their best at the moment, but they're still like, you know, a more established power. And then, you know, are now dealing with, you know, these upstarts, but like these upstarts are about to show like, holy crap, you know, what they can do.
By the time Hormozd reached Hufeir, Khalid started marching to Kazima. He could have probably taken the city with ease, but didn't want to be besieged by the heavily armoured Sassanids, so his troops waited and rested to the south of Kazima, while Hormozd marched towards him. In the first days of April, the tired Sassanid forces approached. The engagement that would occur in the area is traditionally known as the Battle of the Chains, due to the description of the Sassanid forces in the Muslim sources. According to them, the Sassanid infantrymen were chained to each other to create a cohesive line, or to prevent any retreat. However, this makes no sense tactically, as that would have made the infantry even less mobile, and each dead warrior.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's such an interesting thing I've never heard about, you know? Alright, to prevent retreat. Wait, it was supposed to be prevent retreat, right? Let me get that again. I'm sorry, that's so weird.
Of the Chains, due to the description of the Sassanid forces in the Muslim sources. According to them, the Sassanid infantrymen were chained to each other to create a cohesive line, or to prevent any retreat. However, this makes
Okay, I've never heard that before. Like, an army do that. So there's this really bad Dracula movie. I think it's called Dracula Untold, and like, it's a really bad movie, but there's this funny part in the movie where like, so Dracula's wreaking havoc on the freaking Ottoman Empire, right? Like, he's like destroying them battle after battle. And so they're like, the Ottoman generals are like, hey, this guy is like wrecking us. Like, the army won't want to fight, you know, something they're afraid of. And then like one of the generals, I think like the Ottoman ruler or king or whatever, was like, then they won't have to see what they're afraid of. And so the army marches with blindfolds to go and fight Dracula. I'm so sorry. It's just so stupid. Imagine a real army doing that. Okay, they can't be afraid if they can't see. And so they march with blindfolds. Like, how would you keep cohesion? How would you fight an army of blind people? Like, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Oh my goodness, I haven't laughed that hard in a while in these videos. Oh my goodness. But like, you get what I mean. That seems so weird. You would just focus on cohesion and morale, right? That's what all armies do. To keep a straight line, you just practice formations and keeping them. And to prevent retreat, keep up morale and hopefully win. But like I said, I know these are the Muslim sources. It would make, if they actually did do that, I'd be like, what? Like, but I'm not sure if there's embellishment involved. But if they actually did do that, that's hilarious. And I would personally think not smart, but you know, That's just me. If they did do that.
Makes no sense tactically, as that would have made the infantry even less mobile, and each dead warrior would have burdened their companions.
Exactly.
We also never see this description in the numerous battles fought between the Romans and the Sassanids. Most probably, this stems from an incorrect reading of the Persian word silsilah, which can be translated as a mountain chain, a bounding chain, or a single line of soldiers. So the word chain might be a metaphor for the disciplined Sassanid infantry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, like I said, I doubt they actually used chains. But if they did, that'd be hilarious.
In any case, Khalid wasn't going to allow Hormozd's troops to rest, and his preparations forced the Sassanids to form up directly to the west of Kazima at the end of the tiring march. Their formation was the traditional infantry centre and cavalry wings. Meanwhile, Khalid's army was arranged in a similar manner, but for the time being stayed in the desert behind the hills dividing the two armies. This delay only added to the fatigue among the Sassanids, as they had to stay in formation in their full panoply under the sun. However, this wait.
Yeah, I feel like that's the worst part about fighting there. It's like the desert, and it's hot, I imagine, in the Middle East, and then you're marching through the desert or desert lands in armor and just stand. Oh, that would be awful. When it gets hot here in California, like, I hate it, and it's always hot here in California, but like when it gets really hot, but I would imagine our heat ain't anywhere near as bad as the Middle East. I can't even imagine that. Like, I would, oof. That's the worst part. That's the part that gets me most, you know? Like, just the condition, the weather conditions and whatnot, and fighting in the sand. I mean, you know, obviously there is more harder ground, obviously, but you know what I mean.
Waiting couldn't continue for long, as the Sassanids controlled the springs in the area. So a few hours later, Khalid emerged on the hills and his troops stopped some distance away from those of Hormozd. The only surviving primary sources of this engagement belong to the Muslim historians, so we will present their view of this battle. As was customary for the region, and traditional for the Roman, Sassanid and Arab battles of the era, the battle started with a duel, as Hormozd moved forward and called Khalid to fight him one-on-one. Apparently Hormozd then dismounted and Khalid followed suit.
Yeah, so we've seen duels. I think the most prevalent one, if I remember, is the Pyrrhus of Epirus series we watched, where he challenged Paltonkus, the general of Demetrius, you know, essentially challenged Pyrrhus, and Pyrrhus just fought him, and they fought one-on-one, and, you know, won, and I think I remember, like, the Vlad the Impaler series, you know, Vlad often got in one-on-one duels. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for that. Like, who doesn't respect, like, their freaking leaders just going up and just fighting and the whole army just watching and cheering, right? There's something cool about that. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, I think everyone, like, you know, the famous saying from that Troy movie from, like, 2004, you know, imagine, like, a king who fights their own battles. Wouldn't that be a sight? I think that applies to just leaders in general. Like, a lot of respect for leaders who are not afraid to get their hands dirty. Let me get that again. Like,
A few hours later, Khalid emerged on the hills and his troops stopped some distance away from those of Hormozd. The only surviving primary sources of this engagement belong to the Muslim historians, so we will present their view of this battle. As was customary for the region, and traditional for the Roman, Sassanid and Arab battles of the era, the battle started with a duel, as Hormozd moved forward and called Khalid to fight him one-on-one. Apparently Hormozd then did.
yeah, so it seems like I'm glad I rewinded that, because it's good to get that. You know, obviously, we're using Muslim sources, and sometimes, like, we don't have sometimes with sources, we only have one source of one event, you know, so sometimes, like, you have to be careful about that, but, like, like I said, there are times in history where we only have one source for an event. It's like, we can't, like, compare or contrast, right? So it's like we just gotta take it for what we've got.
Dismounted, and Khalid followed suit. As the two generals clashed and fought to a standstill, a few Sassanid skilled warriors attacked Khalid. Another Arab general, Kaka bin Amr, who will play a larger role in the future, saw this and also decided to join the fray.
So there was a one-on-one duel, but then like other people jumped in. Like what the heck?
Khalid's assailants. Kaka and Khalid were able to overcome the Sassanid fighters and killed Hormozd.
Dang.
The Arab generals returned to their lines and Khalid ordered his troops forward. The armies engaged each other. On the wings, the balance of forces didn't allow either side to gain the upper hand, while in the center, the Muslim infantry charged their counterparts a few times, clashing and falling back without dealing much damage. However, the Muslim troops were much more rested, as even the infantrymen had travelled to the battle mounted. The Sassanid footmen weren't able to rest after their march, and each charge tired them even more. During one of the charges, Khalid's center managed to crack the disciplined Sassanid line in a few places. The Sassanid army, which was left leaderless in the wake of the duel, panicked, and the commanders leading the wings, Qubaz and Anushjan, started retreating with their horsemen. Their Muslim cavalry counterparts didn't chase the enemy horsemen, and instead enveloped the Sassanid center. Soon the battle was over. We don't have a clear source on the number of casualties, but it is probably fair to assume that half of the Sassanid army was lost, while Khalid's casualties were less than a few thousand.
So I'm gonna stop the video right there. But yeah, that was cool. Khalid really handled that. He stood on business, killed the enemy leader, won a great victory, used speed and maneuverability to tire out the enemy. Like, honestly, masterful. Like, what a masterstroke. And yeah, this was a really cool part of the first part to get it down, huh? So I'm looking forward to seeing all the rest. And I'll end the video right here, and I'll see you guys tomorrow in the next part. Bye, everyone.